Moving on to something we do know a fair amount about is Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, as most people know them, named after the Neanderthal Valley, which is 12 kilometres from Dusseldorf in Germany. So yes, we are thoroughly in Europe now in the stages of hominid evolution. So they existed around 430,000 years ago, at least based on the skeletal evidence that we have, although potentially much earlier, we just don't know yet. But we know they became extinct around 40,000 years ago, which is of course before the Ice Age, which saw lots of other species become extinct. So the prevailing theory is that Homo sapiens seemed to either outcompete or blend with them to the point where Homo sapiens became the dominant species. There's certainly a large amount of genetic relationship between us and them. So they covered an area of Europe from England to Siberia in the sort of northern portion of Europe, and Spain and Italy in the south. So they didn't really go much further south than that, and they didn't really go much further north than England or Siberia. So that's a decent portion. That's pretty much all of continental Europe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Other than maybe somewhere like Denmark and Scandinavia.
If there'd been some sort of land bridge where there's the Bering Straits, i.e. from Russia over into Alaska and America, so are there no Neanderthals found in the Americas? Is that the case?
Well, I'm going to get onto the Americas, but we haven't got any skeletal evidence, as far as I'm aware. Okay. I mean,
interesting.
But there are some genetic links, so there might be something interesting going on. So there is this is a reconstruction of a Neanderthal. We have been able to map their genome because of how recent they've existed. So we have a reasonable understanding. So the reconstruction is probably a lot more reliable than some of the previous ones. And I do find this pose particularly amusing as well.
Like Rodin's The Thinker, isn't it? It's got it's a more ape-like arms and forearms and shoulders. Have you ever seen a hairless chimp?
Yeah, they're terrifying.
Yeah, they're so jacked, aren't they? They're so pumped.
It made me realise that if I came up against a chimpanzee in a fight, I would not stand a chance.
Yeah. We mentioned Joe Rogan last time. You must have seen a segment where he talks about how insanely strong even a baby chimp is, let alone a full-grown adult male. Yeah, it'd rip you to pieces, literally limb from limb.
I remember seeing a poll that asked, I think it's people in the UK and America, what they could take in a fight. And a majority of Americans thought they could take a chimpanzee in a fight.
No way.
If I'm remembering that right, of course, I might be misremembering it.
I don't even think like a heavyweight champion type person. I think Tyson Fury would struggle with an adult male chimp. I think the chimp would just like rip his fingers off and stuff.
Well,
I don't know that, but
we've seen influencer boxing. Now we know what direction it needs to go in for science. Tyson Fury versus chimpanzee. So in terms of tool use, they were very sophisticated. So we have 3 wooden spears found in Schöningen, Germany. I'm sorry I can't pronounce anything other than pretty much English and some Gaelic, Scots and French, that's it. So they were found in Germany, let's just say that, along with the remains of over 10 horses as well. So it seems like they were hunting horses, as far as I'm aware. I mean, the remains of 10 horses and 3 spears, I mean, you can't get more conclusive than that. So they could build hearths in caves, so they're building up deliberate fireplaces within caves. They used medicinal plants, they used birch bark tar as an adhesive, they made clothes, and they could make boats. So it's surprising, really, how sophisticated they were.
Did they make jewellery? I think they made beads, didn't they? Fashioned quite delicate beads.
I think so, yeah. They have been found alongside that, but one of the problems is because they coexisted with modern humans is who created it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of sites where you find Neanderthal remains, where you also find Homo sapien as well, sometimes at exactly the same time. So to attribute a find to any one species is very difficult. But I think you are probably right. If they're able to do all of this, it seems foolish to say that no, they couldn't make some beads.
And all of that suggests that they must have had a quite relatively sophisticated communication between
Absolutely.
themselves. Certainly had culture and passing things down through generations, ideas through generations and things.
It seems like they had some form of language, although it's difficult to say. I mean, we don't even necessarily know whether they had the same lowered larynx that we have.
Okay.
So maybe they weren't capable of speech as we know it, but maybe they had something comparable. Maybe they did have speech. It's just, as far as I'm aware, we don't know.
My gut feeling is that they sort of must have done, but
To have
that's
this
just a personal
sort of
opinion alert
yeah,
there.
to have this sort of technology, to be able to make a boat, you've kind of got to be able to pass down some amount of wisdom, don't you?
Yeah.
To do that without necessarily speaking is quite difficult. It's possible, but my gut feeling as well is that they probably could converse with one another. I mean, if there's interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, then surely there must have been some small talk going on there.
Well, maybe.
I mean, it could have been far darker than that, who knows? So we know that they at least have emotional sentimentality because from their behaviour, there's a site known as the Pit of Bones in Spain where 20 or more dead have been left in a cave deliberately as a form of sort of early burial site, I suppose,
yeah.
which is an instinct that obviously all modern human beings have to put their dead in a place normally buried, sometimes in a cave or underground, that sort of thing. But it seems like they had this, and of course the impulse to do this comes from an emotional sentimentality towards, and an emotional connection to the dead, and a site that they could potentially visit again if they missed them. So it seems to me that they certainly had human emotions. As I said before, of course, it's highly possible that they made art, but it's very difficult to attribute whether we made it or they did. Of course, yes, speech and potential language is all lost to history, which is a shame. But the existence of Neanderthals they do have some interesting implications for the modern day. So their genome accounts for 1 to 4% on average of modern genomes for people outside of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. I think North Africans have a little bit. So it's either none or possibly up to 0.3% for most Africans, which is very minor. So it's highest in East Asians, intermediate in Europeans, and lower in Southeast Asians, which is interesting, isn't it? Because if they were living in Europe, why is it highest in East Asians? That's strange, isn't it? So it seems perhaps that maybe the migrations that modern humans made to East Asia, they came into contact with lots of Neanderthals, and that might be why there's that. That's certainly a compelling explanation, in my opinion, of why that difference might exist, because of course you would imagine Europeans would have more, but maybe the ancestors of East Asians came into contact with them a higher proportion of the time than Europeans did.
Quite possibly, or maybe it might be just that, again, the archaeological record just is so incomplete that it's just showing a skewed...
This is genetic stuff.
Right, okay, so that is a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? That is interesting, yeah.
So yeah,
at least it shows there's definitely mass migrations, or widespread migrations, should we say.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read quickly from an article which I thought was quite interesting, and it's from Sci News, titled "Neanderthal-derived DNA has significant impact on modern human traits." And I thought this was fascinating when I read it. I didn't realise it was to this extent. So it said, comparing a genome-wide map of Neanderthal gene groups with health records of 28,000 adults of European ancestry, Dr. Capra and co-authors have documented the lingering effects of Neanderthal-derived versions of genes. The data came from the Electronic Medical Records and Genomics Network, which links digitized records from the Vanderbilt University Medical Center's databank with 8 other hospitals around the United States. And they say, our main finding is that Neanderthal DNA does influence clinical traits in modern humans. said Dr. Capra, who is the senior author on a study published in the journal Science, which of course is quite a prominent journal. We discovered associations between Neanderthal DNA and a wide range of traits, including immunological, dermatological, neurological, psychiatric and reproductive diseases. The team first defined about 135,000 high-confidence Neanderthal genetic variations in modern humans. Next, they looked at the relationship between these genetic variations and conditions Neanderthal-derived alleles are thought to influence, ultimately finding that Neanderthal alleles were significantly correlated with the risk of for 12 traits, including depression, myocardial infarction, whatever that is, and blood disorders. For example, the team found that a specific bit of Neanderthal DNA significantly increases the risk for nicotine addiction, which is strange because, of course, Neanderthals would not have come into contact with nicotine because, of course, tobacco is in North America. So they existed in Europe. So that's just a weird quirk of genealogy there. They also found a number of variants that influence the risk for depression, some positively and some negatively. In fact, a surprising number of snippets of the Neanderthal DNA were associated with psychiatric and neurological effects. And I'm quoting here, "The pattern of associations that we discovered suggests that today's population retains Neanderthal DNA that may have provided modern humans with adaptive advantages 40,000 years ago as they migrated into new non-African environments with different pathogens and levels of sun exposure," the scientists said. However, many of these traits may no longer be advantageous in modern environments. So there we go. Obviously, they're buying into the 40,000 year migration thing, which I don't necessarily believe, but I thought I'd include that part in there. But it is surprising how influential their genes seem to be on us today, isn't it? I think that there's increased rates of a number of different things that weren't mentioned there as well, which to me is fascinating. I haven't actually been tested for Neanderthal DNA, but because I'm disproportionately Celtic, I would imagine that there's probably some in there.
Yeah, me too. I mean, coming from northwest Europe, both my parents. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine there's a fair bit in there. But yeah, that is really interesting because you can only really infer that with that level, like, would you say between 1 and 4 up to 4%-ish?
I know
that's quite significant. That means we bred with them loads. That's what that means, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Loads.
I know that Ozzy Osbourne, of all people, had a disproportionate amount of Neanderthal DNA.
Right.
They tested his genes for some reason. I think they're trying to find out how he was still alive.
Yeah.
And they said that it may have contributed to his hardiness from and why he survived his years of drug abuse.
So Keith Richards is like 12% Neanderthal then, by that rationale.
He's pure Neanderthal. It's been refined over the years.
But you actually, we joke, but there must be outliers, people that have got even more than 4%, I imagine.
Absolutely,
right,
yeah.
Right.
Because, of course, the way averages work is that it equates right in the middle, but the upper ends, there might be some Europeans with none, there might be some Europeans with quite a lot. I would be very, very surprised if there were Europeans with none, though.
Right.
I mean, just over the vast span of human history, it's somewhat inevitable that you come into contact with a small percentage. You would have to be very, very isolated.
And the way heredity works, we know that, pardon me, we know that our common ancestors come from quite a small pool of individuals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
It doesn't necessarily take very much for it to have a significant influence over our genome, does it? If it's got that small pool.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.